Okay, so as we were discussing, Liberal Bruce Fanjoy, he beat out Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre for the Carleton riding in Ontario last night. Despite that shock for the party, the Conservatives made several gains, big gains in Ontario last night, winning 12 more seats in the province compared to the last vote. I'm joined now by one of the winners, by Conservative Scott Aitchison, who was re-elected for a third term in his Ontario riding of Parry Sound Muskoka. Scott Aitchison, it's good to speak to you here on Power and Politics, and congratulations on your win.
Well, thanks for having me, David. It's good to see you.
I'd like to start with where I just ended my conversation with Bruce Fanjoy. What do you make of the fact that despite increasing the vote, despite increasing the seats, your leader lost his own riding last night?
Well, I'll tell you, he's won that riding many, many times. He won it initially when he was 25 years old. And nobody thought he could pull it off because I think it was probably seen that those suburban Ottawa ridings tend to vote Liberal. But Pierre proved that with hard work and commitment, you can pull it off, and he did it a number of times. And I think that he showed the country that too, and he showed an awful lot of candidates in parts of Ontario, for example, that we haven't won in a long time. We took seats in Northern Ontario where he visited lots and lots of times. And so, he's I've never seen anyone work harder in my life. And for a long time, I didn't know how he did it. I think he lives on espresso, but he's worked hard and gained his seats all over the place in places where we generally don't win. And so, there's been a lot of change and hit the riding at Carleton. And I think that, he served that community well, but he's done so much for our party that he can take a minute and figure out what happens next and how he does that. And I'll be there to support him.
Okay, so he is going to take a minute. Certainly when he gave his speech last night, Mr. Aitchison, he might have known, I'm assuming he probably knew the trajectory that was playing out in his own riding, but I don't think the rest of us did because it was the 91 names on the ballot and all of the advance voting still needing to be counted. But he has no seat right now, so he's no longer the leader of the opposition. He is still the leader of the Conservative Party. There's been a lot of noise about members of the caucus just re-elected, potentially giving up their seat for him. What do you think will happen here? Do you think Pierre Poilievre will stay on as leader and seek entry to the House of Commons in a by-election, or is there some other path here?
Well, I'll tell you what I want him to do, and I want to make sure that he continues on as our leader, and how that occurs and what they do to make that happen, we'll see soon enough. That's his decision, and I'll give him time to make that decision. But we need Pierre to keep going. He's grown our movement. He's engaged young people in a way that I haven't seen in a generation probably. We increased voter turnout. It's amazing what he's done. Not the result we wanted last night, but a step in the right direction. I think he will be the next Prime Minister of Canada.
Well, but Scott Aitchison, I wonder how strong do you think the support is inside the caucus? Look, obviously successful in vote share, successful in seat count. A failure to deliver on the promise of a majority that was certainly there when Parliament rose for the Christmas holidays and before former Prime Minister Trudeau stepped down. But a good result for Mr. Poilievre. But, I don't need to tell you, your caucus, you kind of lead the league in regicide, right? It's one and done for a leader if they don't win, and this is one. What is your sense on whether or not Mr. Poilievre will also be done?
Oh, I think caucus support for Pierre is strong and solid, and it should be. He won the leadership of our party convincingly. He's actually improved our numbers. We have a bigger caucus now, thanks to him and his work and his leadership. I think that the idea of ousting a leader just because they didn't win government, even after making incredible progress like he has, is a dumb idea. We need to build on the progress that Pierre's already made.
So what do you need then to do to build on that progress? Because, you're an Ontario Conservative. I don't need to tell you the side drama that was playing out between the federal Conservatives and the provincial Conservatives in Canada's largest province. There is a similar narrative, but of a smaller scale, playing out in Nova Scotia. There seems to be friction between the federal party and provincial parties in provinces where you had room to grow and needed to grow, even beyond what you were able to do in Ontario in this election. So what do you need to do to build on this?
Well, I think that we need to focus on our jobs going forward. It's not fun to be in the opposition, but we need to continue to be His Majesty's loyal opposition. work with the government when it comes to areas of Canadian sovereignty and dealing with, Donald Trump and these ridiculous on-again, off-again tariffs. I think, as Pierre said last night, we will be united as Canadians in that fight. But we also need to make sure that we're holding the government to account, suggesting improvements where those are available, and opposing where we think the government is wrong. I think we need to keep building on that. We need to continue speaking to Canadians and on behalf of Canadians. I don't think that this minority government's going to last that long, and I think that the more work we continue to do to make sure that life is more affordable for Canadians as well. I think that in a couple of years, you could see that, Pierre Poilievre is the next Prime Minister of Canada.
When you say you don't see this minority of parliament lasting that long, I mean, do you measure it in months, or do you measure it in like 18 months to 2 years, that sort of thing, which is like the historic length? Because there are going to be conversations starting with Donald Trump as soon as next month, if the public commentary from both sides of the border to be believed. That would seem like a fraught time to try to force another election.
Well, I can't predict how long it will last. It'd be wishful thinking if I told you I hope it doesn't last much longer than a few months. But I obviously, that's my wishful thinking. I don't know how long it will last. Minority parliaments don't generally last that long. This one lasted 3.5 years, this last one, and that's long for minority parliaments. So I think history has taught us that we should be ready to go very quickly. Yeah,
I'm not sure there's going to be a sequel to the Supply and Confidence Agreement. But it does seem at 169 seats a reasonably durable minority as minorities go. But, Mr. Aitchison, just as a couple of final points. There was a big gender gap in what we saw in the polling, that your party struggled with women, in particular older women. And there was a sense in some pools of voters that your party didn't kind of respond strongly enough to the rhetoric of Donald Trump and the threat posed by Donald Trump. Do you think you reacted well enough to what happened in this election coming from the United States as a party? How would you have done it differently if you feel you could have throughout this campaign?
Well, I can certainly tell you about my experience here in Parry Sound, Muskoka, and I would suggest that it is true that I would say, generally speaking, people of the baby boomer generation, particularly women, were, I think, more concerned about Donald Trump and about his rhetoric. And a lot of them told me that they just thought that Mark Carney was more appropriate to deal with Donald Trump than Pierre Poilievre. I think that was there's some truth to that going on across the country. I personally don't agree with that. My sense is that what I learned in the schoolyard was that you need to stand up to bullies, and Pierre Poilievre strikes me as the kind of guy that would just do that. He would stand up to the bully and fight for Canada, just as he's continued to fight for Canada as the leader of the opposition. He was too good as a leader of the opposition, I guess, because thanks to Pierre, there's no Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister anymore, who was very unpopular. Just thanks to Pierre, the carbon tax has been reduced to zero. He's been incredibly effective. That's the kind of fighter I want, standing up to a bully.
Yeah, he's the knight who slayed his dragon too early in his story, it seems, though, in terms of driving out Justin Trudeau. I just wonder, Mr. Aitchison, as a final point, that you believe Mr. Poilievre is the right person to stand up to Donald Trump. Why do you think it is? So many Canadians, though, the women and the boomer women that you're talking about there, they didn't feel that way because you'd correctly identified the issue set, built this commanding lead in the polls, but when the question became who can best protect us from Donald Trump, the answer was Mark Carney for enough people that he now has a minority government here.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure why that is. I've heard over and over again that part of it was tone, but I honestly just think that in the course of that election campaign, we didn't have enough time to convince those that voter coalition, that voter group, that Pierre was the right person to stand up to Donald Trump. So I think we have an opportunity now to continue to spread our message, to continue to speak to Canadians, fight for Canada, and demonstrate why the Conservative Party and Pierre Poilievre as its leader are the right party to lead this country.
Scott Aitchison, congratulations on your re-election. It was very good to have you on the show, and we hope you come back. Thanks for being here today, sir.
Thanks very much, David.
The Conservatives walked away with 41.4% of the vote last night, an 8% increase since the last vote. You can see there they are up in every region, including 9 points in Ontario. All of that led to the Conservatives gaining 16 seats across the country, 12 of them in Ontario, including in Liberal strongholds in the 905 and places like Brampton West, where Conservative Amarjeet Gill beat out Liberal incumbent and Health Minister Kamal Khera, who had held that seat since 2015. Now, despite those gains, Conservatives lost arguably the most important seat in this election, and the most surprising result of the night. Pierre Poilievre, their leader, he was behind Bruce Fanjoy all night, the Liberal who eventually won that seat, and was not able to make a comeback by morning.
To the millions of people who voted for the Conservative Party and put their hopes and dreams in our vision, thank you. It will be an honor to continue to fight for you. We know that change is needed, but change is hard to come by. It takes time. It takes work. And that's why we have to learn the lessons of tonight so that we can have an even better result the next time the Canadians decide the future for the country.
I'm joined now by David McLaughlin, former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, and by Peter MacKay, the former Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party. Gentlemen, it is good to see you both on the day after the election. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
Peter MacKay, let's start with you, and let's start with Pierre Poilievre. I mean, vote share up, seats up, leader down. Where does this leave Pierre Poilievre the day after the election?
Well, I think a period of reflection is in order, but as you pointed out at the beginning, I was surprised like everybody else. I'd heard the rumors. I think there was a Globe story that he was in trouble in his own riding and they were sending people in. But that was by far the biggest shock of the night amongst many topsy-turvy outcomes here and there. Disappointed, obviously, with the outcome in Atlantic Canada. But look, that's the nature of the game. It's like professional prize fighting. Sometimes someone gets knocked out, and sometimes it goes the distance. This was a short snapper of an election, and now I think the Conservative Party, in spite of the wins and the gains that you pointed out, are going to have to reflect not only on this election, but where they go from here. They will need a leader in the House. That probably is job one.
Right, David, a short snapper of an election, but an election they called for multiple years and seemingly had unlimited cash in the run-up to get ready for, and yet they had some challenges throughout this. I mean, you know, he gave a speech to suggest he wants to stay on, and I think it would be reasonably easy to find someone to step aside for him so he could run in the by-election. Do you think that's the right move for the Conservatives after what happened?
Yeah, I think he should be given another chance, or at least a chance to make his case for another chance. I mean, as Peter says, you know, the party does need a bit of reflection to try to understand why an election that was theirs to lose, they lost. I mean, you know, they really should have won this election, all things being equal. Things kind of got away from them. They were unable to kind of meet the zeitgeist of the moment, which was Trump and tariffs, and sort of reposition themselves. My sense of the campaign was that it was very much a playbook that they wanted to run and win as their kind of Conservatives, very populist, a little more to the right of center. They wanted to win on their own terms. The trouble is, it's the voters that get to determine the terms, right? And so they were unable to really pivot, soften their image a bit, reach out to those, you might call time for change liberals, that probably peel away some of those, what we would say, soft liberals back home, right, Peter, in Atlantic Canada, and bring them over. They were unable to do that, and so we get the results that we have. And of course, Mr. Poilievre losing his own seat, it's kind of a topper on it because it reinforces that Mr. Poilievre was, for many voters, that barrier still holding them back from actually, you know, voting blue in the end.
Okay, I can interrupt for 1 second. For breaking news, it is the final elected seat in the 2025 election, and it is a Conservative seat. Mark Dalton has held Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge. This was one of the seats on the long list of 11 seats that had this very narrow political goat path to 172 for the Liberals, and that path got washed out by votes for the Bloc Québécois, the Conservative Party of Canada, and for the NDP. So congratulations to Mark Dalton, a significant lead there. Sorry, what was that, Tyler? projected elected there. Yes, so that is the final. I think that's the final one. That is riding number 343 of 343. So Peter MacKay, just on that, a second chance for Pierre Poilievre. There was this rigidity, though, this unwillingness to pivot. His personal popularities became a drag on the party overall. And, Scott Aitchison was on the show earlier today talking about, with women in particular, it became a challenge. So those are not insignificant things. So how do you think that factors in the decision the party would make here, and your own assessment of whether Pierre Poilievre should be allowed another crack at this?
Well, my own view is that Pierre Poilievre does deserve a second chance, and the party will, of course, ultimately determine that, and he will make his own decision, which is a very personal one. It takes an incredible toll. I would suggest less than 24 hours when we're still seeing people being elected is probably not the best time to make the most informed decision. David made some very astute comments, and the word that the Conservative Party obviously wrapped much of their campaign around was change. Unfortunately, for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, Mr. Carney very cleverly and very adeptly became the agent of change and sort of assumed that position. Whether he deserved that mantle or not, given that he was around the party for 5 years and has the same people who were around the party for 10 years and the same cabinet, the same policies, time will tell. The other factors, of course, you mentioned that Mr. Poilievre had no control over. The insertion of Mr. Trump at the very beginning, the middle, and the very end of this campaign made it extremely tough. Mr. Carney held himself out as the Trump whisperer. And, even the phone call, it turned out to be a bit of a half-truth, that it was a very cordial call and they were going to talk after the election. Well, that part might have been true, but there was also talk of the 51st state, just as sort of the tax havens, Brookfield, all of that was sort of half-truths. And so now we face still a great deal of uncertainty vis-a-vis the United States. I'm hopeful, and I think, David, you will agree, that Canadians have a modicum of hope that we'll get back to work. I heard you say a moment ago, we need to get Parliament in session, we need a budget. That's absolutely true. This has been a torturous and vulnerable period for our country by virtue of a lot of the political machinations, including this election. Not that that's a machination, but we need to get people back to work, back in position, and prepared to take on a very uncertain and unpredictable U.S. administration.
Getting people back to work and getting it working again, that's going to require a whole different change in how the Conservatives have approached Parliament. I mean, you saw that story in the Toronto Star, I'm sure, their playbook on how to make committees hell and make them a total mess and just make Parliament a dysfunctional social media clip machine. If this Parliament comes back with Trump hanging over it and they continue with that, I'm not sure what it says, but I mean...
It's a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, look, they couldn't control how Donald Trump intruded into the election, but they could control how they responded to it.
Absolutely.
And they chose not to really do it early. They wanted to stick with the plan to beat Justin Trudeau with Joe Biden.
And then they tried to pivot later on. There's an old saying in politics: you can't fatten the pig on market day. You got to get yourself ready before you sell the pork on market day. And so they were late to that party, and I think they should learn from that. Look ahead as to where this dynamic is going. Canadians elected a minority parliament, but they do want stability overall in the country. And if dealing with Trump is job one, as Peter is correctly pointing out, then the Conservatives, it's incumbent upon them as the official opposition to try to find their way to do that. Hold the government accountable, try to be helpful, try to be serious about it, and I think voters will respond accordingly. If they overtly politicize this, then I think it's going to wear very badly on them. But they've also got some other challenges too, because it's not entirely for them to sort out. So Trump comes in from the outside. You have Danielle Smith today talking about a national unity crisis within the Conservative family. I know there was a lot of heat and that about Doug Ford in Ontario, but Doug Ford's not threatening in a way to have a secessionist kind of conversation. And Conservatives, ground zero for conservatism in Canada for the movement is Alberta and Saskatchewan. So if you have this very strong, assertive effective Alberta Premier talking, raising doubts about unity, etc., that's going to be a hard dynamic as well for the Conservatives.
It tethers the national leader where they can go.
It sure does. So, so Mr. Poilievre has got, and the Conservative Party, but they've got a number of constraints to, that they're going to have to work around. It's not entirely all in his sort of hands to make this, to determine the outcome. He's going to have to navigate this through. But I would agree with you wholeheartedly with what Peter's saying. Trump is job one, and how the Conservative Party responds to that will help determine whether or not people will start to look at them a bit differently afterwards.
So Peter, on that point, when Parliament does come back, look, we're going to have a new cabinet, we're going to have a throne speech, the country needs a budget, right? This all has to happen. Trump is overlaying on that the way he did on the election, and there's going to be trade talks and renegotiations and security arrangement conversations, like real grown-up stuff that needs to be dealt with in a grown-up way. If Parliament goes back to what it was last year, I mean, what's the value in that? So does the opposition need to be a little bit less oppositional? I'm not blaming them for all of it, but they drove most of it. What do you think they need to do?
Well, I think there was an obvious animosity that existed between Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau, just as I would say that Mr. Trump and Mr. Trudeau didn't exactly get along. But that's neither here nor there. Canadians expect that the government is going to get back to work and that there will be the role of His Majesty's official opposition. I still stumble over that. Yep. That will hold the government to account, but that means getting things done in the national interest. If it quickly turns into an acid splashing, axe throwing contest, Canadians are going to have very little tolerance for that, and everyone will pay a price. But the real issues do remain, and I would be quick to point out this was obviously a lot of debate throughout the campaign. The affordability crisis is still there. We still have rampant crime on the streets of some of our biggest cities. Drugs are still an issue. We still, of course, are very concerned about interest rates and joblessness and immigration. These are all very substantive issues that this Parliament is seized with. As for what Pierre Poilievre can do, there's a little bit of house cleaning. I mean, that's more of an internal political discussion that has to take place. They will do the inevitable post-mortem on the campaign itself. But, I think there are some questions that have to be answered by the people who were in charge and the preparedness of the campaign. I'm not going to go so far as to describe it the way that Corey Teneycke and others did, but when you're calling for a campaign, banging on about it, as you said, David, for 2 years, and you're 100 candidates short, when the writ drops, that is a problem.
Yeah, some questions to be answered, David, but only 4 and no follow-ups. That's one thing they may want to reconsider. But just with if we go back to theatrics in the House, this is a final point. Politically, whatever you can do that. The country right now needs a government that can function free of parliamentary noise, at least on the big files with the U.S. right now. Not that they shouldn't be held accountable for it, but it should be proper accountability as opposed to dysfunctional accountability, it seems.
Absolutely. But it's also up to Mr. Carney as our Prime Minister to set an agenda that actually Parliament can work with. I mean, he's the first one to set the tone, the throne speech, how they react to this stuff. If there is a kind of an arrogance, the Liberal DNA is arrogance, the Conservative DNA is meanness, right? These are sometimes these two things that come out. But if the traditional Liberal arrogance sort of asserts itself, then Conservatives as opposition, others will react to that. So it's up to Mr. Carney and his new government to set the tone there and to set out an agenda to actually deal with some of these things. As Peter says, it's a big agenda. He's going to have to figure out, pick and choose there, what he's going to move on first. And that will help determine whether or not Parliament is actually functioning. But again, Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives, they should read the room. Absolutely, the country, voters want the country to work. 2 years, perhaps, get through this Trump thing, and then we can be back to politics.
You're seeing some interesting signals at the First Minister's table because it's been very collaborative and there's been movement and productive,
Absolutely.
And that maybe is a sign for what we might see in Parliament. We'll check in with you once we get some more clues of where that's going. Peter MacKay, David McLaughlin, always good to speak with you both. Thanks for being here today.